In the mid-14th century, a silent and devastating force emerged from the heart of Central Asia, casting a shadow that would engulf Europe in one of history's deadliest pandemics, the Black Death. Originating around the 1330s, likely within the Mongol Empire, this plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, spread along bustling trade routes, reaching Europe by 1347. Its arrival in Sicily marked the beginning of a catastrophe that would claim 30 to 50% of the continent's population, reshaping medieval society. This exploration delves into the origins of the Black Death, its initial spread through trade networks, the historical and environmental context that fueled its virulence, and its profound significance as a turning point for Homo sapiens' resilience and adaptation. The Black Death is believed to have originated in the arid steppes of Central Asia, likely in the region of modern-day Kyrgyzstan or Mongolia. Around the 1330s, historical records, such as Chinese chronicles from the Yuan dynasty, describe outbreaks of a deadly disease in the 1330s, with symptoms matching the plague's swollen lymph nodes, fever, and blackened skin caused by hemorrhaging. The bacterium Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on rodents like black rats, thrived in the dense trade networks of the Mongol Empire, known as the Pax Mongolica, which connected east and west through the Silk Road. Archaeological evidence supports this origin. Plague reservoirs, identified in rodent populations in Central Asia, contain Yersinia pestis strains, genetically linked to the Black Death, as confirmed by ancient DNA studies from burial sites. The Mongol Empire's vast trade routes, stretching from China to the Black Sea, facilitated the plague's spread, with infected fleas hitching rides on caravans and ships. By 1346, the plague reached the Crimean Peninsula, specifically the port of Kaffa, where Genoese merchants became unwitting carriers, spreading the disease to Europe. The Black Death's arrival in Europe is vividly documented in historical accounts. In October 1347, a Genoese fleet from Kaffa docked at Messina, Sicily, bringing the plague to European shores. Contemporary chroniclers, such as Gabriel de Musas, describe sailors arriving with swollen lymph nodes, buboes, and blackened skin, dying within days. From Messina, the plague spread rapidly to Genoa, Venice, and Marseille, following trade routes and port cities. By 1348, it engulfed France, Spain, and England, reaching Scandinavia by 1351. The plague spread was facilitated by two primary forms: bubonic, transmitted by flea bites, and pneumonic, spread through respiratory droplets. The crowded, unsanitary conditions of medieval cities, with poor waste management and dense populations, created ideal environments for fleas and rats. Chronicles from Florence, such as Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, describe the rapid spread through markets and homes, with entire families perishing. The plague's relentless advance, killing millions within years, underscores the vulnerability of interconnected medieval societies. Archaeological discoveries provide stark evidence of the Black Death's origins and early spread. In Central Asia, burial sites from the 1330s, such as those near Lake Issyk-Kul, contain skeletons with Yersinia pestis DNA, confirmed through genetic analysis, linking these outbreaks to the Black Death. In Europe, mass graves, such as those at East Smithfield in London, approximately 1348 to 1350, reveal hastily buried skeletons, with DNA evidence confirming the presence of Yersinia pestis. Similar plague pits in Venice and Paris show chaotic burial practices, reflecting the overwhelming mortality rates. Trade artifacts, such as Chinese ceramics and Islamic diners found in Kaffa and Messina, highlight the role of trade routes in spreading the plague. Shipwrecks, like those off the Italian coast, contain rat remains with flea evidence, supporting the theory of maritime transmission. Chronicles and tax records from Genoa and Florence document population declines, with deserted homes and abandoned markets, painting a grim picture of the plague's early impact. The Black Death's rapid spread was shaped by the historical and environmental context of the 14th century. The Pax Mongolica, established by the Mongol Empire, created a vast trade network that connected Asia to Europe. As discussed in the context of Islamic Trade Chapter 3, Spread of Islam series, this connectivity, while fostering commerce, enabled the plague to travel swiftly, as evidenced by trade goods in Kaffa and Messina. The growth of medieval cities, fueled by agricultural advancements, Agricultural Revolution series, led to overcrowding and poor sanitation, exacerbating the plague's impact. Climatic changes also played a role. The Little Ice Age, beginning in the 14th century, brought cooler, wetter conditions that increased rodent populations, as seen in environmental studies from Europe. Malnutrition, common among medieval populations due to famines like the Great Famine 1315-1317, weakened immune systems, making communities more susceptible, as evidenced by skeletal stress markers in plague graves. These factors converged to create a perfect storm for the plague's devastation. The Black Death's emergence required Homo sapiens to confront an unprecedented crisis. The rapid spread through trade routes reflects the unintended consequences of global connectivity, as discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. The ability to document the plague, through chronicles like Boccaccio's and medical texts by Guy de Ilziac, demonstrates cognitive ingenuity in recording and analyzing the crisis. The initial response, panic, flight, and religious fervor highlights the social challenges of managing fear and uncertainty. Socially, the plague's arrival disrupted medieval communities, as seen in abandoned villages and deserted cities. The shared experience of loss, documented in church registers, fostered a collective trauma that reshaped social bonds, setting the stage for transformations explored in later chapters. The resilience of survivors, adapting to a decimated world, underscores Homo sapiens' capacity for survival and adaptation. The Shadow from the East, arriving in 1347, marked a turning point in human history, exposing the vulnerabilities of interconnected societies. The plague's rapid spread through trade routes, from Kaffa to Messina, highlights the double-edged nature of global networks, fostering both prosperity and peril. Its impact, killing millions, reshaped medieval Europe, influencing economic, social, and cultural shifts that paved the way for the Renaissance. The legacy of the Black Death's origins offers lessons for modern pandemics, emphasizing the role of trade and urban conditions in disease spread. The resilience of Homo sapiens in facing this crisis underscores their adaptability, a theme that continues to resonate in contemporary responses to global challenges. The Black Death, emerging from Central Asia around 1347, cast a deadly shadow over Europe, as evidenced by mass graves, chronicles, and trade artifacts. Its origins in the Mongol Empire and rapid spread through trade routes highlight the vulnerabilities of medieval connectivity. This catastrophic event reflects Homo sapiens' exposure to global risks, while foreshadowing their resilience. The Shadow from the East set the stage for profound transformations, as we explore its broader implications in subsequent discussions. The Black Death, erupting in Europe in 1347, swept across the continent with a ferocity that left cities desolate and communities shattered, claiming 30 to 50% of the population by 1351. From its arrival in Sicily's port of Messina, the plague danced through trade hubs like Genoa, Venice, and Paris, reaching the farthest corners of England and Scandinavia in a mere 4 years. Carried by fleas on rats and amplified by human contact, this catastrophic pandemic, caused by Yersinia pestis, exposed the vulnerabilities of medieval society's interconnectedness. This exploration delves into the mechanisms of the plague's rapid spread, the immediate devastation it wrought, and the archaeological and historical evidence illuminating its deadly dance, highlighting its profound impact on Homo sapiens' resilience and survival. The Black Death's journey began in Messina, Sicily, in October 1347, when Genoese ships from Kaffa in the Crimea docked, carrying infected sailors and rats. Chronicles by Gabriel de Musis describe the grim scene: sailors with swollen lymph nodes, blackened skin, and fever, dying within days. From Messina, the plague spread to Genoa and Venice by early 1348, following bustling trade routes that linked Mediterranean ports. By mid-1348, it reached Paris, London, and Bordeaux, and by 1351, it engulfed Norway and Sweden. As recorded in Scandinavian church registers, the plague spread was driven by two primary forms: bubonic, transmitted through flea bites, and pneumonic, spread via respiratory droplets. The bubonic form, causing painful buboes in the lymph nodes, had a mortality rate of 30 to 60%, while the pneumonic form was nearly 100% fatal, as described by Giovanni Boccaccio in Florence. The plague's rapid advance was fueled by medieval trade networks, established during the Pax Mongolica Chapter 1, and exacerbated by the crowded, unsanitary conditions of cities. where waste piles and cramped housing provided ideal habitats for rats and fleas. Mechanisms of transmission. The Black Death's deadly dance was propelled by several key mechanisms. Trade routes. The plague followed trade routes, as evidenced by infected ports like Messina, Genoa, and Venice. Merchant ships, carrying goods like silk and spices, also transported infected rats, as seen in shipwreck remains off Italy's coast. Chronicles from Venice describe ships arriving with dead crews, spreading the plague to dockworkers and markets. The Silk Road and Mediterranean trade networks, linking Europe to Asia, facilitated the plague's swift dissemination, as discussed in Chapter 3 of the Spread of Islam series. Medieval cities, with populations dense and sanitation poor, were breeding grounds for the plague. Florence, described by Boccaccio, had narrow streets filled with waste, fostering rat populations. Archaeological evidence from London's sewers shows rat bones with flea remains, confirming their role in transmission. The lack of waste management, as noted in Parisian records, amplified the plague's spread in urban centers. The pneumonic form, spread through coughing and sneezing, accelerated transmission in crowded settings, like markets and churches. Boccaccio recounts families infected through contact, with entire households perishing. Rural areas were not spared, as infected travelers carried the plague to villages, as seen in English tax records showing depopulated hamlets. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of the plague's devastation. Mass graves at East Smithfield in London, approximately 1348 to 1350, contain hundreds of skeletons, buried in layers with minimal ceremony, as confirmed by radiocarbon dating and Yersinia pestis DNA. Similar plague pits in Venice, Paris, and Barcelona reveal chaotic burials, with bodies stacked in trenches, reflecting the overwhelming mortality. Skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition and stress, indicating weakened populations vulnerable to the disease. Historical records amplify this grim narrative. Boccaccio's Decameron, approximately 1353, describes Florence's deserted streets, with bodies left unburied as fear paralyzed communities. Chronicles of Froissart in France detail the plagues spread through monasteries and markets, while Ibn al-Wardi's accounts from Cairo describe Egypt's 40% population loss. Church registers from England and Norway document sharp declines in baptisms and marriages, reflecting societal collapse. Artifacts like plague crosses, found in churches, indicate early attempts to ward off the disease through prayer. The Black Death's immediate impact was catastrophic, disrupting every facet of medieval life. In Florence, Boccaccio describes families fleeing cities, only to spread the plague further. Social bonds frayed as fear led to abandonment, with neighbors shunning the sick, as noted in Parisian chronicles. Religious institutions, hit hard by the deaths of clergy, struggled to maintain authority, as seen in reduced church donations recorded in London. The plague sparked panic and superstition. In Germany, groups like the Flagellants whipped themselves to seek divine mercy, as documented by chroniclers. Pogroms targeting Jewish communities, falsely blamed for the plague, erupted in cities like Strasbourg, as recorded in local annals. These reactions reflect the psychological toll on Homo sapiens, as communities grappled with an invisible enemy, foreshadowing cultural shifts explored in later chapters. The plague's rapid spread tested Homo sapiens' cognitive and social resilience, the ability to document its progression through chronicles like Boccaccio's and medical observations by Guy de Chauliac, demonstrates intellectual efforts to understand the crisis. As discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series, early attempts at quarantine, such as Venice's isolation of ships, reflect cognitive ingenuity in responding to the unknown. Socially, the plague disrupted medieval hierarchies, as survivors faced a world of loss. The shared trauma, evidenced by mass graves and deserted villages, fostered a collective sense of vulnerability, setting the stage for social and economic transformations. Chapters 4 and 5. The resilience of survivors, who rebuilt communities amidst devastation, underscores Homo sapiens' adaptability, a recurring theme in human history. The Black Death's deadly dance through Europe, from 1347 to 1351, exposed the fragility of medieval society's interconnectedness as trade routes became conduits for death. Its rapid spread, driven by fleas and human contact, highlights the risks of global networks, a lesson echoed in modern pandemics. The immediate devastation, empty cities, mass graves, and societal collapse paved the way for profound changes, from the decline of feudalism to the rise of the Renaissance. The plague's impact underscores Homo sapiens' vulnerability to unseen threats, while their ability to endure and adapt highlights their resilience. The lessons of this period, from the dangers of urban overcrowding to the power of collective response, remain relevant in addressing contemporary global challenges. The Black Death's deadly dance, beginning in 1347, swept through Europe with devastating force, as evidenced by mass graves, chronicles, and artifacts. Its rapid spread through trade routes and urban centers reflects the vulnerabilities of medieval connectivity, reshaping Homo sapiens societies. This catastrophic event, driven by Yersinia pestis, set the stage for transformative changes, highlighting both fragility and resilience. Its broader implications, explored in subsequent discussions, reveal the enduring impact of this plague on human history. The Black Death, raging across Europe from 1347 to 1351, unleashed a demographic catastrophe that transformed vibrant cities into ghostly wastelands, and left rural villages abandoned, killing an estimated 30 to 50% of Europe's population. This devastating plague, caused by Yersinia pestis, struck indiscriminately, decimating communities from bustling trade hubs like Venice and Florence to remote hamlets in England and Norway. The sheer scale of mortality overwhelmed medieval society, leaving behind haunting evidence in mass graves and deserted settlements. This exploration delves into the demographic devastation, the immediate impact on urban and rural communities, and the archaeological and historical evidence of this grim era, highlighting the profound toll on Homo sapiens societies and their resilience in the face of collapse. The Black Death's mortality rate was staggering, with estimates suggesting it claimed 30 to 50% of Europe's population, roughly 20 to 50 million lives, within 4 years. In urban centers, where dense populations and poor sanitation fueled the plague's spread, mortality often exceeded 50%. Florence, as described by Giovanni Boccaccio in the Decameron, lost over half its residents, with some estimates reaching 60%. London and Paris faced similar devastation, with chronicles reporting entire neighborhoods emptied. Rural areas, though less densely populated, were not spared, as infected travelers spread the disease, leading to abandoned villages across England and France. The plague's lethality stemmed from its two primary forms: bubonic, with a 30 to 60% mortality rate, causing painful swellings, buboes, and pneumonic, nearly 100% fatal, spreading through respiratory droplets. Historical records, such as church registers from England, show a sharp decline in baptisms and marriages, reflecting the collapse of communities. The demographic catastrophe disrupted every facet of medieval life, from trade to agriculture, setting the stage for profound social and economic changes explored in later chapters. Medieval cities, thriving hubs of trade and culture, became epicenters of death. Venice, a bustling port, lost up to 60% of its population, as recorded in municipal records, with markets and docks falling silent. Florence, described by Boccaccio, saw streets littered with unburied bodies, as gravediggers and priests succumbed. Paris, a center of learning, faced similar chaos, with chronicles noting deserted universities and churches. The plague's spread was exacerbated by urban conditions, crowded housing, open sewers, and rat-infested markets, as evidenced by archaeological finds of rodent remains in London's sewers. The urban toll was immediate and visible. Guilds, markets, and religious institutions collapsed, as workers, merchants, and clergy perished. Chronicles from Siena describe abandoned workshops, while tax records from Genoa show a sharp drop in revenue, reflecting economic paralysis. The loss of urban populations disrupted trade networks, as discussed in Chapter 2, and forced survivors to adapt to a radically altered social landscape. Rural communities, though less densely populated, faced equally devastating losses. In England, villages like Wareham Percy were abandoned, as evidenced by deserted fields and homes in archaeological surveys. Tax records from France document entire hamlets vanishing, with survivors fleeing to cities or succumbing to the plague. The spread to rural areas, carried by infected travelers or merchants, as noted in Froissart's chronicles, disrupted agricultural production, leaving fields fallow and livestock untended. The rural devastation had cascading effects. The loss of farmers crippled feudal estates, as seen in English manorial records, weakening the agrarian economy. The plague's indiscriminate nature, affecting both peasants and lords, challenged feudal hierarchies, foreshadowing social upheavals discussed in Chapter 5. Rural communities, once tightly knit, faced isolation and despair. As recorded in Scandinavian sagas describing empty villages, archaeological evidence vividly captures the Black Death's toll. Mass graves, such as those at East Smithfield in London, approximately 1348 to 1350, contain hundreds of skeletons buried in layers, with Yersinia pestis DNA confirming the plague's presence as verified by genetic analysis. Similar plague pits in Venice, Paris, and Barcelona reveal hasty burials, with bodies stacked without coffins, reflecting the overwhelming mortality. Skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition and stress, indicating weakened populations vulnerable to the disease. Historical records amplify this grim picture. Boccaccio's Decameron, approximately 1353, describes Florence's collapse, with families abandoning the sick and bodies left unburied. Chronicles of Froissart in France detail the plague's impact on monasteries and markets, while Ibn al-Wardi's accounts from Cairo estimate Egypt's 40% population loss. Church registers from England and Norway record plummeting baptisms and marriages, signaling societal breakdown. Artifacts like plague crosses and memento mori carvings, found in churches, reflect the cultural response to widespread death, emphasizing mortality and repentance. The demographic catastrophe reshaped medieval society. In cities, the loss of skilled workers, artisans, merchants, and clergy disrupted guilds and religious institutions. As seen in Sienna's abandoned workshops, social bonds frayed as fear led to isolation, with Boccaccio noting neighbors shunning the sick. In rural areas, the collapse of communities, as evidenced by deserted villages like Warham Percy, fostered a sense of collective trauma, recorded in local annals. The plague sparked diverse reactions. In Germany, the flagellants movement, documented by chroniclers, saw groups whipping themselves to appease God, reflecting heightened religiosity. Pogroms against Jewish communities, falsely blamed for the plague, erupted in Strasbourg and Mainz. As recorded in local histories, these responses, driven by fear and desperation, highlight the psychological toll on Homo sapiens, setting the stage for cultural shifts explored in Chapter 6. The Black Death tested Homo sapiens' cognitive and social resilience, the ability to document the crisis, through chronicles like Boccaccio's and medical observations by Guy de Chvalec, reflects intellectual efforts to understand an unseen enemy, as discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. Early public health measures, such as Venice's quarantine of ships, demonstrate cognitive ingenuity in responding to the crisis. Socially, the plague's devastation disrupted medieval hierarchies, as survivors faced a world of loss. The shared trauma, evidenced by mass graves and abandoned settlements, fostered a collective sense of vulnerability, paving the way for social and economic transformations. Chapters 4 and 5. The resilience of survivors, rebuilding amidst desolation, underscores Homo sapiens' capacity for adaptation, a recurring theme in human history. The Black Death's demographic catastrophe, transforming cities into wastelands and villages into ghost towns, exposed the fragility of medieval society. Its impact, killing millions, disrupted trade, agriculture, and social structures, setting the stage for the decline of feudalism and the rise of the Renaissance. The lessons of this period, from the dangers of urban overcrowding to the resilience of communities, remain relevant for modern pandemics, highlighting Homo sapiens' ability to endure and adapt. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, left Europe's cities and villages as cities of the dead, as evidenced by mass graves, chronicles, and deserted settlements. Its demographic devastation, claiming 30 to 50% of the population, reshaped Homo sapiens societies, exposing their vulnerabilities and resilience. This catastrophic event, driven by Yersinia pestis, set the stage for profound transformations, as we explore in subsequent discussions, revealing its enduring impact on human history. The Black Death, sweeping through Europe from 1347 to 1351, unleashed a demographic catastrophe that obliterated 30 to 50% of the continent's population, as explored in Chapter 3. This massive loss of life triggered profound economic disruptions, shattering the foundations of medieval Europe's feudal economy. The scarcity of labor empowered surviving workers, upended agrarian systems, and accelerated the shift toward a cash-based economy, reshaping trade and commerce. Cities like Florence and Venice, once thriving hubs, faced collapse, while rural estates struggled to survive. This exploration delves into the economic upheaval caused by the Black Death, the mechanisms driving these changes, and the archaeological and historical evidence, illuminating their impact, highlighting how Homo sapiens adapted to a transformed economic landscape and laid the groundwork for modern systems. The Black Death's staggering mortality rate, claiming an estimated 20 to 50 million lives, decimated Europe's workforce. Urban centers, like Florence, as described by Giovanni Boccaccio in the Decameron, lost over half their artisans and merchants, paralyzing markets and guilds. Rural areas, such as England's villages, saw fields abandoned, as recorded in manorial rolls, with entire communities like Warren Percy deserted. This labor shortage disrupted the feudal system, which relied on serfs to cultivate land for lords, as evidenced by plummeting agricultural output in France and England. The economic impact was immediate and far-reaching. Trade networks, vital to cities like Venice and Genoa, faltered as merchants and dockworkers perished. With port records showing a sharp decline in shipments, the collapse of labor-intensive industries like textile production in Siena, and the reduction in tax revenue, documented in Genoa's fiscal records, plunged Europe into economic chaos, forcing societies to adapt to a radically altered reality. Mechanisms of economic disruption. The Black Death reshaped medieval economies through several key mechanisms: labor shortage and wage increases. The loss of 30 to 50% of the workforce empowered surviving laborers, who demanded higher wages due to their scarcity. In England, the Statute of Labourers 1351 attempted to cap wages, as recorded in parliamentary rolls, but workers defied these laws, securing better pay, as seen in wage records from London. In Florence, artisans gained bargaining power, with guild records showing increased wages for weavers and masons. The feudal system, reliant on serf labor, crumbled as lords faced labor shortages. English manorial records document lords commuting labor services to cash payments, allowing serfs greater freedom. In France, abandoned estates, as seen in tax records, forced lords to lease land or shift to cash crops like wool, accelerating the transition to a market economy. Trade networks, disrupted by the plague, saw temporary collapse, with Venice's port records showing a 50% drop in shipments by 1348. Surviving merchants adapted, focusing on luxury goods like wine and cloth, as evidenced by Tuscany's market records. The recovery of trade hubs, like Genoa, by the 1360s, laid the foundation for the Renaissance economy, as discussed in later chapters. Archaeological evidence vividly captures the economic devastation. Mass graves, such as those at East Smithfield in London, approximately 1348 to 1350, contain skeletons of artisans and laborers, with Yersinia pestis DNA confirming the plague's role, as verified by genetic analysis. Abandoned villages, like Warren Percy in England, reveal deserted homes and fields, with archaeological surveys showing unharvested crops. In Siena, unfinished construction projects, like the cathedral's expansion, stand as testaments to the loss of skilled workers. Historical records amplify this narrative. Boccaccio's Decameron describes Florence's deserted markets, with trade stalls abandoned. Chronicles of Froissart in France detail the collapse of agricultural production, with fields left fallow. Tax records from Genoa and Paris show plummeting revenues, reflecting economic paralysis. Guild records from London and Florence document wage increases, as surviving workers leveraged their scarcity. Artifacts like trade goods, such as reduced pottery and textile finds in Venice, highlight the disruption of commerce. The economic upheaval spurred significant transformations. The labor shortage empowered workers, weakening feudal hierarchies. In England, the shift from labor services to cash payments, as seen in manorial rolls, gave serfs greater autonomy, foreshadowing the Peasants' Revolt, 1381. In Florence, artisans and merchants rose in status, as evidenced by guild membership records, contributing to social mobility. The shift to a cash-based economy accelerated, as lords turned to cash crops, like wool and wine, to offset losses, as seen in Tuscany's market records. This transition, documented in trade ledgers, laid the groundwork for capitalism, with urban centers like Venice and Genoa recovering as trade hubs by the 1360s. The economic empowerment of workers and the diversification of agriculture reshaped medieval economies, influencing the Renaissance and modern systems. The Black Death tested Homo sapiens' cognitive and social resilience. The ability to adapt to labor shortages, as seen in wage negotiations recorded in London, reflects economic ingenuity. The development of new trade strategies, such as focusing on luxury goods, demonstrates adaptability, as evidenced by Venice's recovery. Chroniclers like Boccaccio and physicians like Guy de Chauliac, documenting economic impacts, showcase intellectual efforts to understand the crisis, as discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. Socially, the economic disruption challenged feudal norms, fostering new social structures. The rise of urban guilds, as seen in Florence's records, empowered artisans, while the decline of serfdom, documented in English manorial rolls, reshaped rural communities. This resilience, amidst economic collapse, underscores Homo sapiens' capacity to adapt to crisis. Setting the stage for further transformations explored in Chapter 5, the Black Death's economic devastation, shattering feudal systems and trade networks, marked a turning point in European history. The labor shortage and wage increases empowered workers, weakening feudalism and accelerating the shift to a cash-based economy. These changes, rooted in the plague's disruption, laid the foundation for the Renaissance economy and modern capitalism. As urban centers like Venice and Florence adapted to new realities, the legacy of this economic upheaval offers lessons for modern crises, from labor market shifts to economic recovery. The resilience of Homo sapiens in navigating these disruptions highlights their adaptability, a theme that continues to resonate in addressing contemporary economic challenges. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, shattered Europe's economies, as evidenced by mass graves, abandoned villages, and disrupted trade. Its demographic devastation, killing 30 to 50% of the population, upended feudal systems and empowered workers, reshaping Homo sapiens' economic landscape. This economic upheaval, driven by labor shortages and trade disruptions, set the stage for transformative changes, as we explore in subsequent discussions, revealing its enduring impact on human history. The Black Death, sweeping through Europe from 1347 to 1351, left an indelible mark on medieval society, annihilating 30 to 50% of the population and shattering economic foundations. As explored in Chapters 3 and 4, this demographic catastrophe triggered profound social transformations, undermining feudal hierarchies, empowering laborers, and reshaping gender roles. From the bustling cities of Florence and London to the desolate villages of France, the plague disrupted traditional social structures, fostering unrest and mobility that laid the groundwork for modern societal frameworks. This exploration delves into the mechanisms of social change, the immediate impacts on communities, and the archaeological and historical evidence illuminating these shifts, highlighting Homo sapiens' resilience and adaptability in navigating a world turned upside down. The Black Death's massive death toll, estimated at 20 to 50 million, destabilized the rigid feudal hierarchies that defined medieval Europe. The labor shortage, as discussed in Chapter 4, empowered surviving workers, who leveraged their scarcity to demand better wages and conditions. This shift challenged the authority of feudal lords, who relied on serfs to sustain their estates, as seen in English manorial records. In urban centers like Florence, artisans gained influence, reshaping social dynamics, as documented in guild records. The plague also sparked social unrest, as survivors grappled with loss and inequality. Movements like the Peasants' Revolt in England 1381 and the Jacquerie in France 1358 reflected growing discontent among laborers, who sought greater rights. Women, filling labor gaps left by the dead, temporarily gained economic roles, as evidenced in wage records from Paris. These transformations, driven by the plague's disruption, marked a turning point in medieval society, fostering a new social order. Mechanisms of social transformation. The Black Death reshaped medieval society through several key mechanisms. Erosion of feudal hierarchies. The labor shortage weakened feudalism as serfs gained bargaining power. In England, manorial rolls from Norfolk show lords commuting labour services to cash payments, granting serfs greater autonomy. This shift, documented in tax records, eroded the rigid feudal structure, empowering peasants and foreshadowing uprisings like the Peasants' Revolt. In cities like Florence and London, the loss of artisans elevated the status of surviving workers. Guild records from Florence show increased membership and influence, as craftsmen demanded higher wages and political representation. This rise in urban power, evidenced by civic charters, shifted social dynamics, fostering a new class of skilled workers. The plague's mortality created opportunities for women, who filled labor shortages in trades like brewing and weaving. Wage records from Paris and London document women earning wages comparable to men, a temporary shift in gender roles. Church records also show women taking on roles as midwives and caretakers, reflecting their increased visibility in post-plague society. Archaeological evidence captures the social upheaval. Mass graves at East Smithfield in London, approximately 1348 to 1350, contain skeletons of labourers and artisans, with Yersinia pestis DNA confirming the plague's role, as verified by genetic analysis. Abandoned villages like Wareham Percy in England reveal deserted homes, with archaeological surveys showing disrupted community structures. In Siena, halted construction projects, like the cathedral's expansion, reflect the loss of skilled workers, as evidenced by unfinished stonework. Historical records provide further insight. Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron describes Florence's social breakdown, with families abandoning traditional roles. Chronicles of Froissart in France detail the Jacquerie, where peasants revolted against feudal lords, as recorded in local annals. Guild records from London and Florence show increased artisan influence, with new charters granting political rights. Church registers from England document women's roles in post-plague labour, while tax records from France show declining feudal revenues, reflecting social shifts. Regional social impacts. The Black Death's social transformations varied by region. Italy and Florence. The loss of over 50% of the population empowered artisans, as guild records show, increased membership and wages. The rise of urban elites, documented in civic charters, shifted power from feudal lords to city councils, fostering social mobility. Venice saw similar trends, with merchants gaining influence, as seen in trade ledgers. In England, the labour shortage led to the Peasants' Revolt, 1381, as recorded in parliamentary rolls, with peasants demanding land rights. Manorial records from Norfolk show serfs negotiating cash payments, weakening feudal ties. The rise of urban guilds in London, evidenced by guild charters, empowered craftsmen, reshaping social hierarchies. In France, the Jacquerie 1358 reflected peasant unrest, as chronicled by Froissart. Tax records from Bordeaux show declining feudal revenues, while wage records from Paris document women's increased roles in trades like brewing. These shifts, driven by labor scarcity, fostered a more fluid social structure. The Black Death tested Homo sapiens' cognitive and social resilience. The ability to negotiate new social roles, as seen in Florence's guild records, reflects social ingenuity in exploiting labor scarcity. The documentation of unrest, like the Peasants' Revolt, by chroniclers like Froissart, showcases intellectual efforts to analyze societal change, as discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. Early public health measures, such as Venice's quarantines, demonstrate cognitive adaptability in crisis response. Socially, the plague's disruption of feudal hierarchies fostered new structures. The rise of urban guilds and the empowerment of women, as seen in Paris wage records, reflect a shift toward social mobility. This resilience, amidst societal collapse, underscores Homo sapiens' capacity to adapt, setting the stage for cultural transformations explored in Chapter 6. The Black Death's social transformations, dismantling feudal hierarchies and empowering laborers, marked a turning point in European history. The rise of urban guilds and the decline of serfdom, as seen in England and Florence, laid the foundation for modern social structures, fostering mobility and equality. The temporary empowerment of women highlights the plague's role in challenging traditional roles, influencing later societal shifts. The legacy of these transformations offers lessons for modern societies, from labor empowerment to social mobility. The resilience of Homo sapiens in navigating these changes underscores their adaptability, shaping a new social order that influenced the Renaissance and beyond. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, set medieval society in flux, as evidenced by mass graves, abandoned villages, and guild records. Its demographic devastation empowered laborers, weakened feudalism, and reshaped gender roles, transforming Homo sapiens' social landscape. These changes, driven by labor scarcity and social unrest, set the stage for the Renaissance, revealing the enduring impact of the plague on human history, as we explore in subsequent discussions.
The Black Death, ravaging Europe from 1347 to 1351, unleashed a demographic and economic catastrophe that shook the very foundations of medieval society, as explored in chapters 3 and 4. Beyond its physical toll, the plague triggered a profound religious upheaval, challenging the authority of the Catholic Church and sparking a desperate quest for divine salvation. As communities grappled with the loss of 30 to 50% of their population, fear and despair fueled fervent religious movements, from the flagellants to increased pilgrimages, while skepticism grew toward a church unable to halt the scourge. This exploration delves into the mechanisms of religious transformation, the cultural and social impacts, and the archaeological and historical evidence, highlighting how Homo sapiens sought meaning and salvation amidst the plague's devastation. The Black Death struck at the heart of medieval Europe's spiritual life, where the Catholic Church held immense authority, guiding souls through a world centered on salvation. The plague's indiscriminate slaughter claiming clergy and laity alike shattered this order. In Florence, Giovanni Boccaccio described priests dying alongside their flocks, with churches abandoned as fear overtook faith. The Church's failure to stop the plague, as noted in chronicles from Paris, led to widespread disillusionment as people questioned divine will and ecclesiastical power. This crisis sparked diverse responses. Some turned to fervent religiosity, seeking divine mercy through extreme acts, while others grew skeptical, laying the seeds for the Reformation. The plague's toll, as seen in London's church records, showing a 50% loss of clergy, weakened the church's infrastructure, forcing Homo sapiens to confront existential questions about faith and mortality, reshaping religious life for centuries. Mechanisms of religious transformation. The Black Death drove religious change through several key mechanisms. Decline of church authority. The church's inability to halt the plague eroded its authority. In Siena, chronicles note priests refusing to administer last rites, fearing infection, leading to public distrust. Church registers from England document a shortage of clergy, with untrained priests filling gaps, as seen in York's records. This decline, recorded in Froissart's chronicles, fostered skepticism, weakening the Church's grip on society. Fear of divine punishment fueled extreme religiosity. The Flagellants, a movement in Germany and the Low Countries, whipped themselves to atone for humanity's sins, as described by chroniclers like Jean Davenet. Pilgrimages surged, with relics and shrines, like those at Canterbury, seeing increased donations as evidenced by church ledgers. These acts reflected a desperate cry for salvation amidst widespread death, The plague's terror led to scapegoating, particularly against Jewish communities falsely blamed for poisoning wells. Pogroms in Strasbourg and Mainz, recorded in local annals, saw thousands killed, reflecting a turn to religious extremism. These violent acts, driven by fear, further strained social cohesion, as discussed in Chapter 5. Archaeological evidence captures the religious upheaval. Mass graves at East Smithfield in London, approximately 1348 to 1350, contain skeletons buried with plague crosses, indicating desperate prayers for salvation, with Yersinia pestis DNA confirming the plague's role. Churches across Europe, like Siena's cathedral, show halted construction, reflecting the loss of clergy and funds. Reliquaries and votive offerings found in Canterbury and Santiago de Compostela indicate a surge in pilgrimage as devotees sought divine intervention. Historical records amplified this narrative. Boccaccio's Decameron describes Florence's abandoned churches, with priests fleeing or dying. Froissart's chronicles detailed the flagellant's processions, with thousands marching in penance. Church registers from Paris and York show plummeting donations and clergy deaths, reflecting institutional collapse. Papal bulls, like those of Pope Clement VI, urged repentance but failed to restore faith, as recorded in Vatican archives. Jewish chronicles from Mainz document pogroms, highlighting the violent religious response. Regional religious impacts. The Black Death's religious impact varied across Europe, Italy in Florence. Boccaccio noted a decline in church authority, with people turning to private prayer or skepticism. The surge in memento mori artworks found in Tuscan churches reflects a focus on mortality. Siena's cathedral, left unfinished, as seen in archaeological remains, shows the loss of religious resources. In England, the loss of clergy, recorded in York's registers, weakened the church, with untrained priests filling roles. Pilgrimages to Canterbury surged, as seen in relic donations, while flagellant-like groups emerged, as noted in local chronicles. These shifts fostered religious questioning, influencing later reforms. In France, Froissart described the Jacquerie Uprising 1358 as partly driven by religious disillusionment. Paris saw increased pilgrimage to shrines, with votive offerings found in churches, reflecting heightened religiosity. Pogroms against Jews, recorded in Strasbourg, highlight the violent religious fervor. The Black Death's religious upheaval reshaped medieval culture. The rise of memento mori and Danse Macabre artworks, found in churches across Europe, reflected a cultural obsession with death, influencing Renaissance humanism. As discussed in Chapter 7, the decline of church authority fostered skepticism. Planting seeds for the Reformation, as seen in critiques by early reformers like John Wycliffe. Socially, the plague's trauma united communities in shared grief, as seen in mass graves, but also fueled division through pogroms and extremism. The surge in pilgrimages and relic worship, evidenced by church artifacts, strengthened communal bonds, while the flagellant's extremism, recorded in chronicles, strained social cohesion. These shifts highlight Homo sapiens' complex response to crisis, balancing faith and doubt. The Black Death tested Homo sapiens' cognitive and social resilience. The documentation of religious responses through chronicles like Froissart's and papal records reflects intellectual efforts to make sense of the crisis, as discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. The emergence of pilgrimage and penitential movements demonstrates social ingenuity in seeking salvation despite institutional collapse. The resilience of survivors, rebuilding communities amidst religious upheaval, underscores Homo sapiens' adaptability. The shift to schism, as seen in early reformist writings, reflects a growing intellectual independence, setting the stage for cultural transformations explored in Chapter 7. The Black Death's religious upheaval, challenging church authority and sparking fervent movements, marked a turning point in European history. The decline of ecclesiastical power and rise of skepticism laid the groundwork for the Reformation, while the cultural focus on mortality shaped Renaissance art and thought. The lessons of this period, from the dangers of religious extremism to the resilience of faith, remain relevant for modern societies navigating crises. The legacy of this cry for salvation highlights Homo sapiens' ability to seek meaning amidst despair, reshaping spiritual and cultural landscapes. Its enduring impact underscores the complexity of human responses to catastrophe, influencing modern religious and cultural dynamics. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, unleashed a religious upheaval, as evidenced by mass graves, abandoned churches, and fervent movements. Its challenge to church authority and rise of religiosity reshaped Homo sapiens' spiritual landscape, fostering skepticism and cultural shifts. This cry for salvation, driven by fear and despair, set the stage for the Renaissance and Reformation, revealing its enduring impact on human history as we explore in subsequent discussions.
The Black Death, sweeping through Europe from 1347 to 1351, left an indelible mark on medieval society, decimating populations, shattering economies, and shaking religious foundations, as explored in chapters 3 to 6. Amidst this devastation, the plague inspired a profound outpouring of artistic and literary expression, as Homo sapiens grappled with mortality and sought meaning in the face of relentless death. From haunting memento mori artworks to the macabre danse macabre motifs and literary masterpieces like Giovanni Boccaccio, Decameron, these creations captured the trauma and resilience of a society in crisis. This exploration delves into the artistic and literary responses to the Black Death, the archaeological and historical evidence of their impact, and their broader significance in shaping Homo sapiens' cultural legacy and the path to the Renaissance. The Black Death's staggering toll, claiming 30 to 50% of Europe's population, thrust mortality into the forefront of medieval consciousness. The pervasive fear and grief, as described by Boccaccio in Florence, transformed art and literature into outlets for processing trauma. The Church's failure to halt the plague, as discussed in Chapter 6, fueled a cultural shift, blending religious devotion with a growing focus on human experience and mortality. This period saw the rise of memento mori, reminders of death artworks, and Danse macabre, dance of death motifs, which depicted death as an inevitable force uniting all social classes. These artistic expressions, found in churches and manuscripts across Europe, reflected a society wrestling with existential questions. Literary works, such as Boccaccio's Decameron, wove tales of survival and morality, capturing Homo sapiens' resilience. The Black Death's cultural impact, rooted in shared trauma, laid the groundwork for Renaissance humanism, emphasizing individual experience and secular thought. Archaeological evidence vividly captures the artistic response to the Black Death. Memento mori artworks, such as skulls and skeletons carved in churches, appear across Europe, with examples in Siena's cathedral and Canterbury's cloisters. These carvings, often paired with inscriptions urging repentance, reflect a cultural obsession with mortality, as seen in East Smithfield's plague graves, where plague crosses were buried with victims. Danse macabre paintings, depicting skeletons leading kings and peasants in a dance of death, adorn church walls in Paris and Lübeck, dated to the late 14th century, as confirmed by art historical analysis. Historical records amplify this narrative. Boccaccio's Decameron, approximately 1353, set in plague-ravaged Florence, recounts stories told by survivors, blending humor and tragedy to explore human resilience. Chronicles like those of Jean de Venette in France describe danse macabre processions, where communities reenacted death's universality. Church registers from England document increased donations for religious art, such as altarpieces depicting death, reflecting a cultural response to the plague. Manuscripts, like the Hours of Catherine of Cleves, approximately 1440, include memento mori imagery, showing the plague's lasting artistic influence. Mechanisms of artistic expression. The Black Death inspired artistic and literary expression through several mechanisms. Memento mori artworks, memento mori motifs, such as skulls, hourglasses, and decaying figures, became widespread in churches and manuscripts. Found in Siena's cathedral and London's churches, these artworks, often inscribed with phrases like, "Remember you must die," urged reflection on mortality. Archaeological finds, like carved skulls in Canterbury, reflect this cultural shift, emphasizing life's transience. The danse macabre, depicting death leading all social classes in a dance, emerged as a powerful symbol of equality in death. Paintings in Paris's Cemetery of the Innocents and Lübeck's Marienkirche, dated to the late 14th century, show skeletons guiding kings, clergy, and peasants. These works, preserved in church frescoes, reflected the plague's indiscriminate nature, resonating with survivors. Boccaccio's Decameron, a collection of 100 tales told by plague survivors, explores morality, love, and survival, blending humor with tragedy. Other works, like Petrarch's Letters, lamenting the plague's toll, reflect a growing focus on human experience. These texts, preserved in manuscripts, laid the foundation for Renaissance humanism, emphasizing individual stories over religious dogma. The artistic response to the Black Death reshaped medieval culture. Memento mori and danse macabre artworks shifted religious art from divine glorification to human mortality, fostering a cultural focus on individual experience. As seen in Siena's frescoes, this shift influenced Renaissance humanism, with its emphasis on secular thought, as evidenced by later works like Petrarch's poetry. Socially, these artworks united communities in shared grief, as seen in church donations for danse macabre. However, they also reflected social tensions, as the plague's trauma fueled pogroms against Jewish communities, blamed for the crisis, as recorded in Strasbourg's annals. The literary focus on survival, as in the Decameron, empowered Homo sapiens to find meaning amidst despair, fostering resilience. Regional artistic impacts. The plague's artistic impact varied by region. Italy. In Florence, Boccaccio's Decameron captured the human spirit, while Siena's cathedral featured memento mori carvings, reflecting a cultural obsession with death. These works, preserved in manuscripts and churches, influenced Renaissance art, emphasizing human emotion. In Paris, danse macabre frescoes in churches and cemeteries, like the Cemetery of the Innocents, depicted death's universality. Chronicles by Jean de Venette describe their impact, uniting communities in shared reflection on mortality. In England, Canterbury's churches featured memento mori carvings, while London's manuscripts included plague-inspired prayers. These artworks, preserved in church archives, reflect a cultural shift toward introspection, influencing later English literature. The Black Death tested Homo sapiens' cognitive and cultural resilience. The creation of memento mori and danse macabre artworks required artistic innovation, blending religious and secular themes, as seen in Siena's. The documentation of the plague's trauma, through works like the Decameron, reflects intellectual efforts to process crisis, as discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. The resilience of artists and writers, crafting meaning from despair, underscores Homo sapiens' capacity to adapt. The shift toward humanism, as seen in Petrarch's writings, laid the groundwork for the Renaissance, influencing cultural transformations explored in Chapter 8. The Black Death's artistic legacy reshaped European culture, fostering a focus on mortality and human experience that fueled Renaissance humanism. The memento mori and danse macabre motifs influenced global art, from medieval manuscripts to modern literature. The literary resilience of works like the Decameron highlights Homo sapiens' ability to find meaning in crisis, offering lessons for modern cultural responses to trauma. This legacy underscores the power of art to unite and heal, shaping cultural narratives that resonate today. The Black Death's influence on humanism and introspection continues to inspire, reflecting Homo sapiens' enduring creativity. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, inspired a profound artistic response, as evidenced by memento mori carvings, danse macabre frescoes, and works like These creations, reflecting Homo sapiens' grappling with mortality, reshaped cultural landscapes, fostering humanism and resilience. This artistic outpouring, driven by trauma, set the stage for the Renaissance, revealing its enduring impact on human history, as we explore in subsequent discussions. The Black Death, raging across Europe from 1347 to 1351, unleashed a catastrophic toll, decimating populations, economies, and religious foundations, as explored in Chapters 3 to 7. Amid this chaos, the plague spurred the emergence of pioneering public health measures, as communities and authorities grappled with an invisible enemy, Yersinia pestis. Cities like Venice introduced quarantines and isolation hospitals, while physicians like Guy de Chauliac documented the disease, laying the groundwork for modern medicine. These efforts, born of desperation, marked a turning point in Homo sapiens' response to pandemics. This exploration delves into the origins, mechanisms, and archaeological evidence of public health measures during the Black Death, highlighting their significance in shaping medical practices and human resilience. The Black Death's unprecedented mortality, claiming 30 to 50% of Europe's population, exposed the limitations of medieval medicine, which relied on humoral theory and prayer. The Church's failure to halt the plague, as discussed in Chapter 6, and the collapse of social structures, Chapter 5, forced communities to seek practical solutions. Cities like Venice, Florence, and Dubrovnik pioneered public health measures, introducing quarantines and lazarettos, isolation hospitals, to curb the plague spread. Physicians, despite limited knowledge, began documenting symptoms and treatments, contributing to early medical science. These measures, driven by necessity, marked the birth of public health as a collective effort to protect communities. The plague's devastation, as described by Giovanni Boccaccio in Florence, prompted authorities to regulate sanitation and mobility, reflecting Homo sapiens' adaptability in the face of crisis. These innovations, though rudimentary, set the stage for modern public health systems. Mechanisms of public health response. The Black Death spurred several key public health mechanisms. Quarantine and isolation. Venice, a major trade hub, introduced quarantine in the 1370s, isolating incoming ships for 40 days, hence quarantine from Italian quaranta giorni. Port records document ships anchored on islands, with crews monitored for symptoms. Dubrovnik established similar policies as seen in municipal decrees from 1377, isolating travelers in designated areas. Lazarettos, like those in Venice's Lazaretto Vecchio, isolated the sick, as evidenced by hospital ruins and burial sites. Cities implemented sanitation measures to combat the plague spread. Florence's councils ordered waste removal from streets, as recorded in municipal decrees, addressing the rat-infested conditions noted in Chapter 2. London's records show efforts to clean markets and regulate burials, reducing exposure to infected remains. These measures, though limited, reflect early attempts at environmental control. Physicians like Guy de Chauliac, a French surgeon, documented the plague's symptoms, buboes, fever, and blackened skin in treatises, distinguishing between bubonic and pneumonic forms. His Chirurgia Magna, approximately 1363, describes surgical attempts to drain buboes, marking early medical observation. Other physicians, like those in Paris, recorded treatments like bleeding, as seen in medical manuscripts. Contributing to a growing body of knowledge, archaeological and historical evidence. Archaeological evidence illuminates these public health efforts. Lazaretto Vecchio in Venice, excavated in the 20th century, reveals hospital structures and mass graves, with Yersinia pestis DNA confirming plague victims. Burial pits in London's East Smithfield, dated to 1348 to 1350, show organized burials away from city centers, indicating attempts to manage infected remains, as verified by genetic analysis. Sanitation artifacts, like cleaned sewer channels in Florence, reflect efforts to improve urban hygiene. Historical records provide further insight. Venice's port logs document quarantine policies, with ships isolated on islands like San Lazzaro. Dubrovnik's decrees from 1377 outline traveler isolation, while Florence's municipal records detail waste removal mandates. Guy de Chauliac's treatises, preserved in European libraries, describe plague symptoms and treatments, reflecting early medical efforts. Church registers from Paris note reduced burials in city centers, indicating regulated cemeteries to curb infection. Regional public health responses. Public health measures varied by region. Venice pioneered quarantine, with port records showing ships isolated for 40 days. Lazarettos like Lazaretto Vecchio housed the sick, as seen in archaeological remains. Florence implemented waste removal, as documented in council decrees, addressing urban sanitation. Physicians like Boccaccio's contemporaries recorded symptoms, contributing to medical knowledge. In Paris, municipal records show efforts to regulate burials and clean markets, reducing infection risks. Guy de Chauliac's treatises from Avignon detail surgical interventions, marking early medical advancements. Marseille established isolation zones, as seen in port decrees, reflecting regional public health efforts. London's councils ordered waste removal and regulated burials, as recorded in civic records. Plague pits like East Smithfield show organized burial sites, indicating public health measures. Medical texts, though fewer, document herbal remedies, as seen in manuscripts from Oxford. The birth of public health reshaped medieval society. Quarantine and sanitation efforts, as seen in Venice's port logs, fostered a sense of collective responsibility, uniting communities against a common threat. The documentation of plague symptoms by physicians like Guy de Chauliac laid the foundation for medical science, influencing Renaissance medicine, as explored in Chapter 9. Socially, these measures empowered civic authorities, as seen in Florence's decrees, shifting power from the church to secular governance, a trend discussed in Chapter 6. However, fear-driven measures, like isolating the sick, sometimes deepened social divides, as noted in Boccaccio's accounts of abandoned patients. The resilience of communities, implementing these measures amidst chaos, underscores Homo sapiens' adaptability. The Black Death tested Homo sapiens' cognitive and scientific resilience. The development of quarantine, as seen in Venice, reflects innovative problem-solving, adapting maritime practices to public health, as discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. Guy de Chauliac's documentation of symptoms demonstrates analytical rigor, laying the groundwork for empirical medicine. The transmission of this knowledge, through treatises and civic decrees, required communication skills, as explored in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series. The resilience of communities, implementing sanitation and isolation despite limited knowledge, highlights Homo sapiens' capacity to adapt. These efforts, though imperfect, set a precedent for modern public health, influencing responses to later pandemics. The Black Death's public health measures marked a turning point, introducing quarantine, sanitation, and medical observation that shaped modern medicine. The lazarettos and quarantine policies of Venice influenced global health practices, from smallpox to COVID-19 responses. The shift toward secular governance, as seen in Florence's decrees, foreshadowed modern public administration. The legacy of these measures highlights Homo sapiens' ability to innovate in crisis, transforming medical and societal responses. Their relevance endures, offering lessons for modern public health challenges, from pandemics to urban sanitation. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, spurred the birth of public health, as evidenced by Venice's quarantines, lazarettos, and Guy de Chauliac's treatises. These measures, driven by desperation, reshaped Homo sapiens' response to pandemics, fostering resilience and innovation. The legacy of these efforts, setting the stage for modern medicine, underscores their enduring impact on human history, as we explore in subsequent discussions. The Black Death, sweeping through Europe from 1347 to 1351, stands as one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, killing 30 to 50% of the population and reshaping society. As explored in chapters 3 to 8, caused by Yersinia pestis, its scale and impact were unparalleled, but comparing it to other pandemics such as the Justinian Plague, approximately 541 CE, and the Antonine Plague, approximately 165 to 180 CE, reveals both similarities and unique distinctions in their causes, effects, and legacies. These comparisons illuminate the Black Death's singular role in transforming medieval Europe, from economic upheaval to cultural shifts. This exploration examines the mechanisms, archaeological evidence, and broader significance of the Black Death, in contrast to other pandemics, highlighting Homo sapiens' resilience and adaptability in facing global health crises. The Black Death, erupting in 1347, decimated Europe's population through trade routes, urban crowding, and poor sanitation, as discussed in chapters 1 and 2. Its demographic toll, chapter 3. Economic disruption, chapter 4. Social transformations, chapter 5. Religious upheaval, chapter 6. Artistic responses, chapter 7. And public health innovations, chapter 8, reshaped medieval society, accelerating the decline of feudalism and fostering the Renaissance. Comparing it to earlier pandemics, like the Justinian Plague and Antonine Plague, reveals how the Black Death's unique context, global trade networks, and a fragile feudal system amplified its impact, setting it apart in human history. Comparative pandemics: Justinian Plague, approximately 541 CE. The Justinian Plague, caused by Yersinia pestis, struck the Byzantine Empire, killing an estimated 25 to 50% of its population. Centered in Constantinople, it spread through Mediterranean trade routes, as described by Procopius. Archaeological evidence from Pelusium in Egypt shows mass graves with Yersinia pestis DNA, confirming its cause. The plague weakened the Byzantine economy and military, contributing to its decline, but its impact was limited to the eastern Mediterranean, unlike the Black Death's continent-wide reach. Antonine Plague, approximately 165 to 180 CE. The Antonine Plague, likely smallpox or measles, ravaged the Roman Empire, killing 10 to 20% of its population. Described by Galen, it spread through military campaigns and trade, with mass graves in Rome evidencing its toll. The plague disrupted the Roman economy and military, but occurred in a more centralized empire, limiting its social upheaval compared to the Black Death's impact on feudal Europe. Archaeological and historical evidence. Archaeological evidence highlights the Black Death's unique scale. Mass graves at East Smithfield in London, approximately 1348 to 1350, contain hundreds of skeletons with Yersinia pestis DNA, reflecting chaotic burials. Unlike the smaller graves of the Justinian Plague in Pelusium, abandoned villages, like Warham Percy in England, show widespread rural devastation, absent in the urban-focused Antonine Plague. Church registers from Florence and Paris document a 30 to 50% population loss, far exceeding the Antonine Plague's 10 to 20%. Historical records amplify these differences. Boccaccio's Decameron describes Florence's societal collapse, with deserted markets, contrasting with Procopius's accounts of Constantinople's resilience. Froissart's chronicles detailed the Black Death's religious upheaval, unlike the Antonine Plague's limited cultural impact, as noted by Galen. Artifacts like memento mori carvings and plague crosses in Siena reflect the Black Death's cultural legacy, absent in earlier pandemics. Comparative analysis scale and spread. The Black Death's 30 to 50% mortality rate, as seen in Florence and London, surpassed the Justinian Plague's 25 to 50% and the Antonine Plague's 10 to 20%. Its continent-wide spread, fueled by trade routes, chapter 2, outstripped the Justinian Plague's Mediterranean focus and the Antonine Plague's Roman-centric spread. The Black Death's rapid dissemination, via fleas and respiratory droplets, was amplified by medieval urban crowding. Unlike the slower spread of earlier pandemics, the Black Death's labor shortage dismantled feudalism, as discussed in chapter 4. with manorial roles showing wage increases and land leasing. The Justinian plague weakened Byzantine trade but did not alter its centralized economy, as seen in tax records. The Antonine plague disrupted Roman commerce but maintained imperial stability, as evidenced by coin hoards. The Black Death's economic transformation was more profound, fostering a cash-based economy. The Black Death spurred social mobility and religious skepticism, chapters 5 to 6, with uprisings like the Peasants' Revolt and Memento Mori, art, reflecting cultural shifts. The Justinian plague caused religious fervor but lacked the Black Death's social upheaval. As seen in Procopius's accounts, the Antonine plague had minimal cultural impact, with Galen noting limited societal change. The Black Death's influence on humanism set it apart, as discussed in Chapter 7. The Black Death pioneered public health measures, like Venice's quarantines, Chapter 8, absent in the Justinian plague, where Procopius notes no systematic response. The Antonine plague saw basic medical observations by Galen but lacked institutional measures. The Black Death's innovations laid the foundation for modern public health, a unique legacy. The Black Death tested Homo sapiens' resilience more intensely than earlier pandemics. The development of quarantines and medical documentation, as seen in Guy de Chauliac's treatises, reflects cognitive ingenuity. As discussed in Chapter 4 of the Homo sapiens series, the social transformations, from labor empowerment to religious skepticism, highlight adaptability. Unlike the Justinian plague's limited social impact or the Antonine plague's minimal disruption, the Black Death's documentation, through chronicles like Boccaccio's, surpassed the Justinian plague's simpler records by Procopius, reflecting advanced communication skills. The resilience of survivors, rebuilding amidst devastation, underscores Homo sapiens' capacity to adapt, shaping a new social order. The Black Death's scale and impact surpassed earlier pandemics, dismantling feudalism, fostering humanism, and pioneering public health. Its influence on the Renaissance, through economic and cultural shifts, contrasts with the Justinian plague's role in Byzantine decline and the Antonine plague's limited legacy. The Black Death's lessons, from quarantine to social mobility, INFORM, modern pandemic responses, highlighting Homo sapiens' adaptability. The legacy of the Black Death underscores its unique place in human history, reshaping societies in ways earlier pandemics did not. Its impact on global cultural and economic development continues to resonate, offering insights into resilience and innovation. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, stands out among pandemics for its devastating scale and transformative impact, as evidenced by mass graves, chronicles, and cultural artifacts. Compared to the Justinian and Antonine plagues, its economic, social, and cultural effects reshaped Homo sapiens societies, fostering the Renaissance. This comparison highlights the Black Death's unique legacy, as we explore its enduring significance in subsequent discussions. The Black Death, raging through Europe from 1347 to 1351, was a cataclysm that claimed 30 to 50% of the population, reshaping every facet of medieval society. As explored in chapters 3 to 9, its devastating toll triggered economic upheaval, social transformations, religious shifts, artistic outpourings, and the birth of public health measures, forging a legacy that reverberated through the Renaissance and into the modern era. From the shattered feudal system to the rise of humanism and quarantine practices, the plague's impact endures as a testament to Homo sapiens' resilience and adaptability. This exploration delves into the lasting legacy of the Black Death, supported by archaeological and historical evidence, and reflects on its relevance for contemporary challenges, highlighting its profound influence on human history. The Black Death's demographic catastrophe, killing 20 to 50 million, upended the feudal economy, as discussed in Chapter 4. The labor shortage empowered workers, leading to wage increases and the decline of serfdom, as seen in England's manorial rolls and Florence's guild records. This shift accelerated the transition to a cash-based economy, with lords turning to cash crops like wool and wine, as evidenced by Tuscany's trade ledgers. The revitalization of trade hubs like Venice by the 1360s, documented in port records, laid the foundation for modern capitalism. This economic transformation had lasting effects. The rise of urban guilds and merchant classes, as seen in London and Genoa, fostered a market-driven economy. influencing the Renaissance and early modern trade networks. The Black Death's economic legacy, empowering labor and diversifying agriculture, set the stage for global economic systems, shaping modern capitalism's emphasis on mobility and commerce. The Black Death inspired a profound cultural shift, as explored in Chapter 7, with Memento Mori and Danse Macabre artworks reflecting a new focus on mortality. Found in churches across Siena and Paris, these motifs, depicting skulls and dancing skeletons, influenced Renaissance humanism, emphasizing individual experience over divine dogma. Literary works like Giovanni Boccaccio's Decameron, preserved in manuscripts, explored human resilience, shaping Renaissance literature with its focus on secular themes. This cultural legacy endures in global art and literature. The Memento Mori tradition influenced modern works. From Shakespeare's Meditations on Mortality to contemporary art, the humanist focus, sparked by the plague's trauma, reshaped cultural narratives, fostering a legacy of introspection and creativity that continues to resonate in modern storytelling and artistic expression. The Black Death's religious upheaval, as discussed in Chapter 6, weakened the Catholic Church's authority, fostering skepticism that paved the way for the Reformation. Chronicles like Froissart's document the Church's failure to halt the plague, while John Wycliffe's critiques, recorded in early reformist texts, reflect growing dissent. Socially, the plague empowered laborers and women, as seen in Paris wage records, challenging feudal hierarchies and fostering mobility. As explored in Chapter 5, this social legacy influenced modern societal structures. The decline of feudalism, evidenced by England's manorial rolls, laid the groundwork for democratic ideals, while the temporary empowerment of women foreshadowed later gender equality movements. The religious skepticism sparked by the plague continues to shape modern secular thought, offering lessons for balancing faith and reason in times of crisis. The Black Death's public health innovations, as explored in Chapter 8, marked a turning point in medical history. Venice's quarantines and lazarettos, documented in port records, and Guy de Chauliac's medical treatises established early public health practices. These measures, evidenced by hospital ruins and burial regulations in London, laid the foundation for modern epidemiology and quarantine systems. This public health legacy endures in global responses to pandemics. From smallpox to COVID-19, the Black Death's emphasis on isolation and sanitation, as seen in Florence's decrees, informs modern public health policies, highlighting the importance of collective action. Its lessons underscore Homo sapiens' ability to innovate in crisis, shaping contemporary health systems. Archaeological evidence underscores the Black Death's legacy. Mass graves at East Smithfield in London, with Yersinia pestis DNA, reflect the demographic toll, while abandoned villages like Wareham Percy show economic and social shifts. Memento Mori carvings in Siena's cathedral and Danse Macabre frescoes in Lubeck highlight the cultural impact preserved in church archives. Guild records from Florence and London document labor empowerment, while Venice's port logs show quarantine innovations. Historical records amplify this legacy. Boccaccio's Decameron and Froissart's Chronicles capture the societal upheaval, while church registers from Paris and York reflect religious and social changes. Medical treatises by Guy de Chauliac, preserved in European libraries, document early public health efforts, underscoring the plague's transformative impact. The Black Death's legacy remains profoundly relevant. Its economic shifts, fostering capitalism, inform modern labor markets, as seen in responses to automation and globalization. The cultural focus on mortality, reflected in Renaissance art, resonates in contemporary literature and media addressing human fragility. The religious skepticism sparked by the plague informs modern secularism, while its public health innovations guide responses to global health crises. However, the legacy also presents challenges. The social upheavals like the Peasants' Revolt highlight the risks of inequality relevant to modern social justice movements. The environmental impact of urban crowding, as seen in Florence, parallels contemporary concerns about sustainability. The Black Death's lessons urge Homo sapiens to balance innovation with responsibility in addressing global challenges. The Black Death's legacy, forged in crisis, reshaped Homo sapiens' world, from the decline of feudalism to the rise of humanism and public health. Its influence on the Renaissance, through economic, cultural, and social transformations set the stage for modern society. The plague's lessons, from resilience to innovation, offer insights into navigating contemporary crises, highlighting Homo sapiens' capacity to adapt and rebuild. This legacy underscores the power of crisis to drive change, shaping global history from the Middle Ages to today. The Black Death's enduring impact reflects Homo sapiens' ability to forge new paths amidst devastation, a theme that resonates in modern challenges. The Black Death, from 1347 to 1351, left a legacy forged in crisis. As evidenced by mass graves, guild records, and memento mori art, its economic, cultural, religious, and public health transformations reshaped Homo sapiens societies, fostering the Renaissance and modern systems. This enduring legacy, reflecting resilience and innovation, offers lessons for contemporary challenges, as we explore its significance in the broader context of human history.